Hello, guys, and welcome once again to another great episode of the Flama podcast, the ultimate guide to the gaming industry. And this is the start of our second season. We're very happy to have you. And we usually talk about video games in this podcast, but we are the ultimate guide to the gaming industry. So we're going tabletop for this one. And today we're doing something very interesting. We have never done it before. We are interviewing two people at the same time, two very special people. We have Zack and Antek from Nyx Studios. Um, Guys, if you could please introduce yourself. Starting with, let's do Zack.
Okay, Z before A. Hi, everybody. I am Zack from Nyx Studios. I am the lead gameplay designer of Havoc. Conceptualized the game way back when we started on this project 3 years ago, and then with the help of my co-designer Cole Beardsley, sort of developed the mechanics of the game, and then Antek, my co-founder of Nyx Studios here, oversaw a lot of pretty much everything else, and he'll tell you about everything he did. But I'm primarily the game designer.
Hi, my name is Antek, and as Zach said, I do quite a few things, but they all find a common denominator in storytelling. So I usually call myself a creative director or creative producer. And the storytelling aspect of it is that, first of all, we started our journey with Havoc at Nyx Studios with story writing. So it all kind of started with a story, and then we started working on a game with many game ideas actually on the table at the very early stages of it. But everything we do eventually ties in one way or another to a story. And every story is useless unless it's told through some kind of a medium. And that means that I dabble in the traditional writing of text and stories, but also animation. I also find it quite an artful storytelling medium to engage in marketing, to engage in community building, and pretty much everything we do at the end of the day has or should have some kind of a story to tell. And because we have this fictive world in our game, we try to put that fictive world on a pedestal and actually imbue a bit of it into everything we do.
I'm going to very briefly expound upon that because I think it has brought up an interesting point, is that when we started making this game 3 years ago, we were making an RPG, and we let the story dictate things so much that we actually created an entirely different genre than we had been developing initially. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm saying if you pick one element, one fundamental grounding, principle or guiding light in the development of your company, or your game, or whatever it may be, follow it. And we made that story, and so that has resulted in us creating sort of an IP company more than just a game company.
Gotcha. So did the story dictated the mechanic of the game?
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
The universe did, the world did. I mean, when I saw this incredible IP that Antek created, especially as it became more and more fleshed out, as a card game player myself, I saw an opportunity to distill that down because there is this sort of existing template of factions and whatever else it may be, and of course you could apply that to any game type, right? But it seemed like a really natural fit for a card game, and I think 3 years later we can say confidently that it was. But RPG to come.
Exactly. That's very interesting because usually what I've heard before from my other mentors is you got to find a mechanic that works and then build on top of that. But for you guys, it's like, nah, story comes first and that dictates the mechanic.
I don't think one is right or wrong. I think as long as you stay true to that guiding light, then you're fine. But you can't flip flop. It's got to be, one or the other.
It's about finding those important bits in every important discipline that you stick to, right? And storytelling should never be something that you adhere to so much so that every tiny element is so important that it has to tower over other things, because there are incredibly important fundamentals in game design, say, and a game loop that makes people want to keep playing. And that's obviously like that isn't superseded by the story. But you will always find multiple different game loops that could work, right? It's never like a choice of one perfect thing. And so whenever you have dilemmas, like, oh, should it be like this or maybe more like this, look at the story and think which one makes more sense in the world that we've created. That's sort of what I would say is how we let the story dictate things, right? It's not by ruling over other domains, but rather serving as a useful guidebook to how which things are better chosen over others.
Precisely. And I've already sent us off on a tangent, which I promised not to do. So I'm going to end it here and just say that don't let one come at the expense of the other. There are times when you have to make, whether it be exceptions, minor exceptions, or, you have to follow one principle or the other for whatever element you're working on at that moment. But the two should support each other. And, yeah.
Awesome. They should have synergy. Okay.
Yes.
I was going to ask you, have you guys worked in the gaming industry before Havoc?
We have not.
I consider myself a journeyman of the gaming industry, and I think it's quite important to be frank with oneself that veterans need to have at least 5-7 years of experience, because there are certain things that you learn only once you've reached certain milestones, which in the context of game making usually take time. But we've passed that stage of being just amateurs. But quite recently, I've worked on games for 3 years. Before that, I was also working on creative things, but not game related specifically, but story related. I was heading a company that provided educational consultancy, you might say, but in reality, what I did was work with young writers to get them started on their writing journey, meaning either just exploring what they're interested in storytelling, writing, traditional stories, short stories mostly, but also participating in community. I'm already thinking about the community. I was basically helping them write stories for submissions into creative competitions.
Well, and I was a writer as well, so we both have creative backgrounds. But I'll just say one more note about whether or not you have experience in the industry. We've of course run into that question before, and we have had some people write us off for that reason. 3 years later, we have a game that's been called a masterpiece and a revelation. So they can go ahead and write us off, given our relative lack of experience in game design. But I think we did okay, and I think we'll be doing okay going forward. So always bet on yourself is all I'll say. I mean, if you believe in your abilities and you believe in your product, eventually you'll find someone to give you the time of the day that you deserve.
If you can, go to enterhavoc.com so you guys can see Antek's and Zach's website. I was blown away by the quality of the packaging, the CG. I'm a software engineer, so the website, the layout, how everything works, the Kickstarter, how professional it is. And it's interesting how we tend to overlook, especially companies, right? These people don't have experience, they don't know what they're doing. And then 2 years later, you guys have this amazing product that was professionally crafted. It looks like something like, I don't know, Magic would do, or Yu-Gi-Oh! It looks so professional. So I wonder, as someone who's aspiring to be in the gaming industry as well, how did you guys went from, okay, we're creatives who don't know a lot about making games, to we have a full-fledged game that people are loving? How did that transition occur?
Well, first of all, we'll say this. I'm sure Antek is going to start singing the praises of the art team, as we both should, because they're largely responsible for everything you were just talking about with the website design and everything like that.
Right.
So we'll do that soon. This is going to be an annoying answer to your question, but the answer is, if you can pair up with one of the most brilliant men in the world, like I did, then you'll be good to go. I know that's obnoxious, but unfortunately for everyone watching here, I managed to be connected with Antek, who truly is one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. So this is, it wouldn't be half the quality. It wouldn't be 10% of the quality is without him. And beyond that, he also found world-class talents. The art team that I was referring to that we'll talk about, I mean, So I guess if you can't find the most brilliant man in the world, at least find the best recruiter in the world, because
Right.
that's what Antek has also done. So Antek, now that I'm done bragging about you, you can talk about the actual process.
It's difficult to follow up after that one, but uh, I think persistence. We've been working on Havoc for quite a long time, and I think, as I said just now, games take quite a lot of time. Maybe some exceptions could be found, but it's generally an industry that requires a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm.
And when you compare how that effort translates to results, it's usually across a long period of time that you start measuring how much did the 3 years of our effort, how much quality did that create?
Right.
And you can always overdo it and spend too much time doing things, and at some
Mhm.
point things break. So you have to strike the right balance, but you also have to be like quite persistent, as in, like in the process of a 3-year game development cycle. Obviously, there will come times when you've hit a snag, you've hit some kind of a barrier, and the quality of the end product usually depends on how you dealt with barriers when coming across them, and not if you had barriers in the first place, right? So just
Right.
persistence. That's, I would say, like an important bit. But I also think it's very important to mention that we are a Kickstarter project, and that means that we still have Kickstarter barriers, and we have a game to ship, and that persistence is not something we just showed and are now proud of, but also something we are trying to show moving forward, because there's still loads of stuff to do.
One more note on that too is that we have also been given opportunity and privilege, and it's important to recognize that, because so often when you hear any how-to podcast, or this is how you succeed in whatever
Mm-hmm.
industry, it comes with the assumption that the person listening has all the time and resources in the world. Of course, that's not what you personally do, but it's good to remind people that, like, it is going to be harder for some people than it is for others because of the lack of privilege and or opportunity they're given. So if you are climbing that mountain without a foothold, you might not make it, and I'm sorry if that happens. We were lucky enough to be given those opportunities to get money up front to be able to build this, so that I didn't have to do this on the side of a full-time job or whatever it may be. But there are other people who are not that fortunate, and so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we did something incredible despite all of the odds being against us. Not true. We had a lot of, as I say, opportunity and privilege. So if you're one of those people who don't have that, stick to it as much as you can. If you don't make it, it doesn't make you a failure. Just never give up on anything you're trying to do until you have to, and that's okay.
Awesome. So you guys said something very interesting, which is you got to be confident and you have to bet on yourself. When you don't come from a gaming background, how do you find the confidence to bet on yourself and to make a game and present it to the world? That seems a bit it's intimidating to me personally.
Antek, do you want to take this one?
I think someone starting in the game industry, like, first of all, like, it's important to notice that game industry is incredibly competitive. Our generation has grown up with games. Those who have played them became absolutely obsessed with them. They then started making them, and there's huge saturation. There are loads of people making awesome games, and it's very difficult to make something truly original. You have to put a lot of effort into it. Game making is also expensive and very time consuming. And I think what it boils down to is quite a general thing, but the important one to remember about is that you don't necessarily have to be like super confident from the get-go. But one thing that really helps, I think, is sharing the stuff that you do. Because early on, we worked on Havoc, and even things we didn't call Havoc then, in basements. Not really, because we were always a very decentralized team, meaning we didn't have a single basement to share. We
Right.
just called our group chats basements.
I was in a couple actual basements in this process, but anyways, go on.
But we didn't share the stuff that we were making. And it was only around the time that we started truly planning our Kickstarter. So when we're thinking more about publishing and less about design, that we started showing things. And what I learned then is that showing stuff that you make takes time, and it will slow you down, especially if you care about the quality of the things you show. And I mean, you rightfully would. It will slow you down. You can't ever expect that you have infinite time for doing things and showing the things you do. But even slowing yourself down to find a moment to share the stuff that you make with even a very close circle of people can be extremely confidence boosting, and ultimately also translates to the success of your game in many different aspects.
Yeah, so you have to take that time to slow down, because you can't do this thing in a complete vacuum. You have to design a game. If we're talking about just about the game design tenets, you have to share with people because you need objective feedback. So what you need to do is you play your game at the earliest possible stage of a prototype that's ready to be shared, and you take their feedback, you listen to the feedback. You don't have to necessarily apply every single principle that someone tells you in that feedback. But what you need to understand for good game design is that understand the conventions of game design and then choose consciously where to break them. So if someone gives you feedback that is either outside of that convention or maybe perhaps falls into one of those conventions, but you're trying to do something different with that particular element, then you can say, thanks, but no thanks. Of course, you don't have to say it explicitly. Just take the feedback that applies, but make sure that you're not putting up walls against all feedback. You need to accept feedback. And one last thing about objective viewpoints, you have to find a way to look at it objectively yourself. I mean, you have to be honest with yourself and say, at some point down the line, you have to recognize if your game is good or not. I mean, it's okay if it's not good right away, but if you get to the point where you're preparing for the Kickstarter and you can sit down and look at it objectively and go, this game isn't that great, then you should not do that Kickstarter. You need to get it to a place where it is a good game. And that's, that is subjective in and of itself, right? But people can recognize when they're playing a bad game, and you can too if you're honest with yourself.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, is how do you determine, okay, this is good enough to share with people? How do you find that metric?
To some extent, it's trial and error, or at least numbers, right? I mean, if you play it with a dozen people and 10 of them give you negative feedback and not really any positive feedback, there's a red flag right there. Just make sure that you can introduce as many people as possible to it every step along the way. And again, of course, not all feedback from people like this needs to be taken, hook, line, and sinker, but you need to understand sort of the broad arcs of these things and whether or not they, a number of people are giving you similar notes like this. So that's probably not a great answer to that question, but Antek can probably say it more articulately.
I was thinking that the question is how good a thing has to be worth sharing, right?
It's more, how do you determine, because we're talking about making a good game that's good enough to like share with people and start a Kickstarter. How do you determine, okay, this game is good?
So to share with people and to start a Kickstarter, probably two different things, I would say, or at least it's worth distinguishing them. So a game doesn't have to be good to be shared. It can be in its earliest stage. It can be barely playable, and it's already worth sharing. To the mode in which you're sharing a game matters. So if you're bringing this game to market and selling it a promise of creating it, selling a promise as you always would trying to sell something, that it's something, right? It's unique, it's great, it's fun, you can play it so and so. At that point, you have responsibility. At that point, you have to, have shared it many times with a lot of people and gotten positive feedback from them. And it's only then that you know that, yeah, okay, so let's slap a price tag on it and come to Kickstarter with it. But just the sharing and showing others what you're doing, I think that doesn't necessarily have any quality benchmark, or at least a very soft one, right?
Well,
coming down to your ego, basically.
yeah, I mean that's it. And you mentioned you have a responsibility to do this. You have a responsibility to yourself to hold that thing close to the vest until it's ready to be shown. Because if you show it too early to the broader public and it's not ready, then you can sink your own ship. So I would say start with as close a group of trusted friends and advisors as possible, and build outward from there. If you make a significant improvement, then expand that reach. Don't share it publicly, like widely, until you are confident that it is a good game. It doesn't have to be 100% done. I was playing this game with people a year ago when I was still deep in the development process with people online from all over the world, and I was able to improve the game in so doing. I took feedback from people literally all over the world, and just incrementally, and made the game slightly better. So, but it was it was 90% of the way there. It just, we had to do this little iterative process to get it there. So just don't share it too early. Not
Awesome.
with everyone.
Okay, perfect. I do have one more question before we go into our main topic. So Zach, you said you're a card player, right? Yeah, I'm also a card player. Did being a card player, did it help developing Havoc? Did that help
Absolutely.
you?
Yeah. I mean, if we, like, I'll try not to go too deep into game design principles, but every game has been made. So learn from those that you play and take elements from them, let it inspire your game, but find a few fundamental tenets that make it fundamentally different. So yes, you can be inspired by games that you play and that you love. Then the onus is on you to try to make it fresh and new if you're basing it on that. So yes is the short answer.
Awesome. Well, what games do you like to play, if you don't mind me asking?
My favorite card game is one that virtually no one's heard of. It feels like it's called Faeria. Faeria. It's a digital card game. You can find it on Steam or on Nintendo Switch. Really, I won't get into the details, but it's a really, really clever game, really cool game. But I love a lot of different card games. Gwent. Every time I play The Witcher 3, I tell myself I'm not going to play Gwent. I'm just going to play The Witcher, and then I end up playing Gwent and not playing the actual game. So
Gwent, the OG Gwent.
I love I actually think the OG Gwent, the one in Witcher 3, is actually better than the standalone product. I mean, I don't know if I'm in the minority on that, probably, but
Right.
I think it's a cleaner design. But again, another thing we don't need to get into.
For sure. Antek, do you like card games?
I do. I have to say, I never actually gotten into card games printed.
Like physical
the first
card
one
games,
is
right?
the first one is Havoc for me, but digital card games I've played many. And if you wanted to ask for my favorite out there that is not Havoc, it will probably be Inscription. A pretty recent title. Yeah, Inscription is genius on many levels that go way beyond the card game genre. It's just a meta game inside a meta, and then you get out of the meta and you're on the outer circles of what one can do with the world of their game. It's really crazy and inspiring for thinking about how much how much effort has to be put into a game to make it truly original. Because we've done so many things that now you have to be like really avant-garde to create something truly unique. And I think Inscription did it extremely well without jeopardizing it's still understandable. It's avant-garde, but also still something you can easily get into and understand.
Okay, so that's one more point. We're not actually talking about game design, so I won't get deep into it, but I'll just say, once you just decide on the genre that you're making, Play as many games from that genre as possible so that you're not allowing one or two games to inspire and dictate and therefore end up, with a result that's too close to those. Take as many different elements from as many different games as possible to create something new.
Exactly. Dude, Inscription is so good. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I'm more of like a physical card game player. Like I like One Piece TCG or like Yu-Gi-Oh. Yeah. But I do see what you guys are saying. Okay, let's go to the main topic. Antek, something that you mentioned in one of our emails that really captured my attention. So you said that games are made in a circle, not with code. Circles are rounded, they don't have corners, they're very egalitarian. A shape like a triangle is hierarchical. There's different like levels, right? Why a circle specifically? Do you
I don't think
think game design should be like shared in a group, like equally? Like I wonder why a circle.
Exactly. I mean, it's more about the campfire than it is about the geometrical shape. Just
Okay.
it's convenient to sit around the campfire in a circle. What I meant is that games are a medium that is, even when in single player format, something that is awesome to share with others. And we hear a lot about community building. If you go out and search for insights in the gaming industry about the right ways to publish games, especially if you're an indie designer, if you publish for the indie scene, if you have small budgets, small teams, etc., you'll quite quickly find out that community building is the key, right? It's the secret sauce in making indie games. And I think it's not so much a 21st century saturated gaming market thing. It goes way back to that circle, right? It goes back to the campfire. Because here I can't actually remember the author of the anecdote, but there is this one common feature in game industry manuals, like how to start being a game designer type of books, that they always start with history of games, right? Like, oh, the oldest games ever can be dated back to like 2700 BC, the game of Ur found in Mesopotamia. But there's one author whose name I can't remember. Maybe we can attach it to the chat or the info on top of the episode. But he refers back to the oldest games ever created as not anything that exists on any board, anything that uses pawns or tokens, but instead the cave paintings. And the idea there is that those cave paintings that you would find in, for example, Cave de Chauvet, those like animals and humans with spears, that the actual way that these forms of art were created to be enjoyed was that there would always be a torch and a torch bearer and an audience. They would all go into the cave, use the special acoustic features of the cave, and use it as a place for storytelling. And the torch would be, like strategically placed to illuminate things in the right moment of the story. And the torchbearer would always be the one also telling the story. And the audience would be reacting to it in a kind of interactive way, right? They go into the cave already knowing that they share certain things culturally, they share certain stories, and they're coming to like now experience it in this like special mode. And this is like super outdated and esoteric, but I think like when you consider that games are doing a very similar thing and are creating a multimedia experience,
Right.
and that multimedia experience is also something that is not just meant for one person. It's something that is created for many people, for an entire audience. And, in every single player game, because you have many different ways to go, there will always be people who have gone different ways. And that's why it makes it so interesting to talk about the paths that each of us chose for a game, even for like the most single player experiences. And then we get to multiplayer games, and then the community spirit, right? The the value of community is made even more obvious, because people play the game together against each other, with each other, sharing goals, and obviously you want to make it so that this goes beyond the gaming table or beyond the screen, so that people can actually form valuable connections, relations. They can find shared values where they're also enjoying their favorite game.
Yes, so game design should be collaborative because it's for everyone. This will be the first and last time that Antek ever goes off on a tangent and I have to read it.
Okay.
That's it. Game design should be collaborative because it's for everyone.
So for the cave analogy, the cave would be, let's say, the medium. Then you would be the torchbearer, showing the player the scenes, and they would interact with it.
Yes. You can think about it this way when you think about a digital game. It's a bit more obvious when you think about tabletop games and about the role of a game master. It's easier to bring that analogy to them because they're literally just telling the story and using like different items, maps and charts to just and illustrations to show it. And then you also have community leaders or like community mods who are bringing this culture outside of the game, making the community work not only while people are playing together, but also leading the kind of the shared culture that grows around and beyond the game.
Okay, perfect. I do have one more question regarding the cave analogy. What you're describing, which I really like, by the way. I'm really big fan of analogies. It's one of the best mediums to like explain things, I would say. How you explain it, it sounds like the main difference between something like a game and a movie is interaction. The example that you gave me sounds very passive, as you're a spectator looking at the torchbearer pointing out scenes and narrating a story. Where do you bring that interactivity that games have? Like, let's say that a movie doesn't have.
I think that when you bring a torchbearer into that cave, you're usually talking about like a small audience, right? Like so many people can fit inside a cave. And the torchbearer is not just reading out a script. Also, like if we're thinking about those cave paintings, we're thinking about pre-written word.
Sure.
And things in oral output are just way more plastic, and I think the audience always participates, or at least I imagine that they did.
Okay, that's what you're saying.
And it doesn't begin and end with the words of the torchbearer. It is always an interactive experience, and there are questions asked, and the response from an audience might change the torchbearer's direction. At least that's how I imagine it. It's been quite a while.
Cro-Magnon D&D. But going back to the original point is that like the circle that represents the game design development, it's really more of an oval or an egg, because you need a point at some point along the way. You need a little bit of a point to push something forward or make a final decision. Generally speaking, though, it's a largely collaborative process, but at some point someone has to make a decision. You can't just debate over game design forever.
So not just about like a game can exist in its own. A game can be as open or as close to input from, let's say, a community, but it will always be completely open to interpretation. And people great games. A great problem to have as a game maker is to make a game that's so incredible that it just immediately creates a great community of people who just become drawn to, the characters, the stories, the values it shares, everything that it represents. And then a community is found and a bunch of weirdos come together and they're like, we're the same because we love this game. That's like an ideal type scenario. But you have to have a great game to do that. And there's often this problem, which links to the Kickstarter topic, is that very often games take time, games take money. You have to actually make people excited about a game and make them want to support you, which is a big ask. before they can get their hands on the game and feel like, wow, I want to now search for all the other people who love it as much as I do. And that's when you have to become a bit more creative about
Hmm.
how you engage your community. Like specifically when you don't have the game to inspire that excitement.
If any of our weirdos are listening, we're not using that term derogatorily. We're weirdos with you. We're all part of that same group. We love you. So
I hope everyone can see how much of a weirdo I am.
don't worry, they can.
Awesome, 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 awesome. So how do you find this audience? Okay, you have an idea, you make something. How do you go out and find that audience, and how do you grow it?
You start by sharing the things that you make, like baseline, right? You share things that you make, and you find people with whom it resonates. And these will be the most likely candidates for, a community, the kindling for the community.
Yeah, it's that idea of the concentric circles, right? Start with someone close or a close group, and then build out from there. It requires that you do some socializing. There are a lot of game designers who don't want to socialize in any way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
And, if you want to build a community, it's going to require a little bit of socializing with them. So, bite the bullet and do it. But, organic is the way to go, because when you do it organically
Yes.
and you grow from a small group to a large group, then you have cemented those relationships. I'm a big believer in authentic one-on-one relationships. I take calls all day, every day with one individual whom I just met on, whatever platform. Often we'll play the game. And I've done that, hundreds of times now. And over the course of a few years, we've grown a community who love the game because they've been
Right.
personally introduced to it. I mean, that's hard to do. It takes a lot of time and effort. For me, it's nice because I'm an extrovert, so I love doing it. But it is an effective way to build a loyal following if you show them, give them time and respect.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, this very episode happened because I reached out to Zach, like literally, hey, Zach, I have these podcasts. Do you want to join? He's like, yeah. And that's basically what happened, right? Actually, and yesterday I joined your Discord, and
Yes.
you guys like welcome me immediately, super welcoming. I saw the community, your posts, and as you mentioned before, I like how organic everything is. You guys seem very approachable.
Thank
Come
you.
on a Thursday.
Well, you should come on a Thursday, he said, because that's when we have our mired spirits open, which is a long story. I guess that is relevant to community building. If you create something, speaking of campfires around which people
Right.
can, gather. I mean, Mired Spirits is a channel in our Discord that opens every Thursday that is basically a Star Wars Space Cantina-esque vibe of,
Okay.
a sci-fi space bar run by a crazy robot. And so if you create an experience that everyone can, glom onto, and everyone that resonates with people, that engenders imagination, that inspires. I mean, actually, our community, they go in there every Thursday and they start role playing as characters in that space bar. And we didn't necessarily tell them to do that. It's just we created the environment for them, and they kind of took ownership of it. So I guess there's the answer: is give your community something that they can love and you can both love, and therefore you find common ground, and B, something that they can take ownership of. And that's definitely what's happened in the Mired Spirits. I mean, I go in there now if I show up late on a Thursday, and I can't even keep up because I've missed, the events of everything that has occurred that day in the Mired Spirits, and we're out exploring the Nyx now, and I don't know what's happening. So give people something to hold on to.
I love that. Perfect. Alrighty. So when it comes to like feedback, of course, we need feedback to make a game better, to improve upon it. How do you deal with negative feedback or criticism regarding your game? Yeah, I'm very curious. What's the best way to deal with it?
So that's another thing. That's another one of those similar to that thing we brought up earlier about privilege and opportunity, and recognize that sometimes you have it more than other people don't. Everyone says you have to take feedback and you have to take criticism and you have to apply it. That's true, That doesn't mean it's easy. It never is, and it never will be.
Mm-hmm.
And the more sensitive you are, and I'm pretty sensitive, then you have to fight yourself. You got to fight your inner demons. You have to try to overcome that part of you that gets defensive or whatever. You need to take feedback, and you don't have to apply all of it. You should understand your game better than anyone, and therefore you should understand well enough when that feedback applies and when it does not apply. But you still need to be open to it. You still need to accept it. You need to put on a brave face, and you need to smile through it and say, okay, I understand why you feel that way. But sometimes it's hard to swallow.
It's hard.
And that's just the reality.
Yeah, because when it comes to feedback, I believe not all feedback is created equal. Because some feedback might be super irrelevant, or let's say someone who's not really a gamer or who's not into your game might be like, I don't like this game. Why? I just don't like it. Okay, that's feedback, but that doesn't serve me. That's not helping.
That's a good point. You know what? And since this is a collaborative process, let's talk to the people for a moment who give that feedback, right? Because if you're a game designer, you should be getting feedback, but you should probably be giving feedback on other people's games because you should be collaborating and experiencing other things. When you are giving feedback on someone else's game and you play that game for the first time, always preface your feedback by saying, I recognize that I don't understand the full scope of this game. But based on my experience now, this is what I say. It's when people speak in absolutes that I get pissed off. When someone comes in and says, this game is really lacking this. I'm like, oh, okay, you should have used that other card. We played with a 40-card deck. You've played 20 cards because the game ended on round 10. Don't tell me that this thing is utterly missing from the game. Say, hey, maybe this thing could improve it. And I say, oh, great, that's a great idea. Good news is we've already got it. All I'm saying is don't speak in absolutes when you're providing feedback. Always couch it from your perspective and soften the blow because you don't need to be a dick when you're giving feedback.
Yes, humility is important, right? When giving feedback. Yeah. Antek, what do you think?
It's less technical and more about like managing one's ego. I think what is helpful, and I did get used to this mode of thinking quite a while ago, and maybe that's why I don't feel that much pressure of feedback and negative feedback, because I think I just created for myself like a distinction between feedback from people I trust and care about their opinion and the other feedback. And I just attach a slightly different emotional value to them. It doesn't necessarily mean that I listen to one much. I mean, it does, kind of. Like, if I care about someone's opinion a lot, I will obviously like take to heart what they say much more. But I mean, once you go public with your game, especially once you start making this conscious effort to get as many people to like it as you can, right? At some point, if you're a small team and you're doing your own publishing, you have to transition from I'm making a game to I'm publishing a game. And when you're publishing a game, you attach your ego to the fact that like I want as many people as possible to play it now. Find it like understanding that the world is almost infinite when it comes to the number of people who could potentially like your game is also helpful. Like maybe the fact that you're getting negative feedback is not only related to the fact that there's something to be fixed, but also related to the fact that you have to keep looking for people who will like your game. Keep improving it, but also there's an infinite amount of players, and maybe you haven't tapped the right kind of player.
And find champions. Find people who will go out and evangelize your game for you. Find people who truly love it, because you will. They exist. They're out there. And because you're gonna get negative feedback along the way, and I can say have a thick skin, but sometimes you just can't, and it sucks and it hurts and it's annoying. So try to focus on the positives, but because it's hard to do that, just find that balance. Find people who will actually do the work for you of going out and helping you grow that community and those who love it as much as you do.
Okay, perfect. Completely understandable, guys. So for our next topic would be Kickstarter, right? I would like to know, how did you guys learn how to use Kickstarter effectively?
I personally have used Kickstarter a bunch of times.
Well, to clarify, you've been a backer. You have not. run a Kickstarter. Yes.
Gotcha.
Before starting a Kickstarter, I was a backer on a few projects that I really enjoyed, and enjoyed not only what came in the box, but also the intricacies of being a backer. Which, I mean, to anyone who's listening to us who doesn't have too much experience with Kickstarter, it's a different world. It's quite different from the rest of game publishing. And to, I think, most people in the world, it's worse. What I mean by it is that you shouldn't compare games that go on Kickstarter with games that come into traditional publishing mode, especially those who are not going for like early access type of, grounds up, but instead like are delivering a product to the market. The Kickstarters are not 100% complete, right? It's a certain social contract that a Kickstarter project signs with people to whom it airs its message, that, hey, we have this game, it's complete to this point, we need your support to complete it further. For us, like, it was pretty clear. We had a game that was designed, we had a game that was nearly fully illustrated. We just needed to jump over that barrier of printing it, like mass printing. But if you're like going out and looking for a game to buy, to share with your group of friends next time around they come, Kickstarter is probably not the best place, because that game will arrive in a very long time. And that's why I say it's worse in that respect. Like, to the very as a very basic experience of buying a game, if you're just caring about the game, it's probably better to just go out and look for something that's already made. I mean, there are like loads of games that are already made and they're great.
Well, and as the person running the Kickstarter, remember that Kickstarter is not retail. It is not a transactional relationship by any stretch of the imagination. You are building a community. You are building individual connections between yourselves and those individuals who have trusted you enough to back your project that is yet unproven. You should not approach it as, I'm making this many sales on Kickstarter, because it's just not that transactional. It has to be deeper connective tissue there between you and your supporters.
What you get out of it is that deeper connective tissue.
Yes.
Like you might have to wait a bit longer for your game, but what you get, and not everyone will care for that. I think majority of players around the world will not care for that, but those who do will find that it's the true community building. Because like, we very often mean the word community. We say community, and maybe sometimes overuse the word community to just mean player base, right? The community of title A or title B. But we just sometimes mean just players who play that game. What makes it different from what I ideally see as a perfect community is that a community is made by people who care about each other. They don't only share the same activity or share the same interest. They also somehow tie their identity to that community and care for its success in aggregate, the success of the community, and also care for each other's welfare. That's probably the most basic understanding of community, right? Like, we care for each other.
Which means you have to nurture it. You can't ignore it. You can't create a space for them to come together and then say, all right, go support our game. You need to be there. It requires time and effort.
The most human way, or humane way to market a game, right?
Right.
You actually go quite deeply into making and fostering relations between you as a creator and the people who come to support you, but also they grow in numbers, and you are usually put in a position of maybe not full responsibility. They're responsible for it between themselves too, but you kind of have a bit of responsibility to create a culture around that game, right? Write down the rules of engagement, make everyone feel safe, make everyone feel like they get something out of it.
But we did jump ahead to community when really we were supposed to be focusing on the logistical aspects of starting or getting into Kickstarter, period. So we should talk about that as well, because as you noted, we did not have experience running a Kickstarter. So what we did is we worked with an agency called Launchboom. Now, I am I'm not necessarily not recommending them. I'm not necessarily recommending them. I will just say that when you work with an agency, recognize that there are going to be unexpected costs that come with that. So the flat fee for Launch Boom was very reasonable in our mind, but we ended up spending a lot more than that flat fee in the advertising that was required as their formula for having a successful Kickstarter. So just make sure that you understand all of the costs up front. Don't go in seeing a single price tag and expecting that to be the end all be all. Another thing to note is I guess we're talking about games in general, maybe find an agency, or if you're going to go this route, find someone who specializes, someone or something, a group of marketing agency, whatever, PR firm that specializes in games specifically on Kickstarter, because some of the principles that we applied from the sort of broad Launch Boom playbook to the game, the Kickstarter for a game, not all of them worked perfectly in the context of a game. I'm trying to hedge a little bit here, because I do appreciate what Launch Boom did. They have a good program, and maybe it works for. I mean, they did not have a lot of games in their roster of companies they'd worked with who had successful Kickstarters, and we could talk about the specific details of what elements of their formula do and do not work for Kickstarter. Maybe that's a conversation worth having, but I would say at least a good one positive thing to focus on is the focus on building community up front. The way we did it with them was with $1 reservations to get people into our first backers group, and they get a special item with their Kickstarter if they do that. So you grow a community of supporters so that on day one, when you launch your Kickstarter, you have all of those people show up and back it right away. Now, there's also, some friction there, because there are a lot of people who see that particular approach as scammy. That was something that we heard a lot. Like, this is a scam. We didn't understand why a $1 reservation was a scam. We didn't agree that a $1 reservation was a scam. The people who reserved their copy for $1 did get a free item that other people didn't get.
Right.
Unique to them. So it's like, you have to balance that. And I think there's more people in the gaming space who are who more readily jump to, the offensive and say, this thing is clearly a scam. I frankly don't really know the best answer to that. I mean, we got many, many more people, hundreds of people who did decide to back us in advance and reserve for that $1, far more than those people who, called it a scam. Actually, okay, here's an interesting one. I had a guy, we were a couple weeks into this process, and a guy was like the fifth guy to say this is a scam, and I was fed up at that point. And so I said to him, okay, I'll make you a deal. I'm going to play the game with you. If you like it, you buy it, you back the Kickstarter when it comes out. If you don't, I'll tell the world with you that this is a scam. And he said, okay, you're on. We played the game. He became one of our biggest supporters. He was in he came into our Discord. He brought his brother and his sister and cousin, I think, into the Discord. So there's also this element of there are people out there who are going to say things because it is their, natural reaction to be a little bit trolly. And if you don't have to take the time to address all of them one by one, but if you do, sometimes it might actually work out for you.
Yeah, that is a very beautiful story.
It's very saturated.
Mm-hmm.
There's a pretty low percentage of projects that actually succeed. So in this moment in Kickstarter's history, there's more projects than backers in general.
Mhm.
And well, not numerically speaking, but there's not enough backers for all the projects who go live. And this is about like 3,000 projects live on average every single day, running usually on average like 30 days, 20, 30. What this means is that, again, it's super competitive, and that you can't expect that the visibility that launching a Kickstarter gives you, since you're there in that database of 3,000, is literally like anything to care about. But you have to bring traffic from elsewhere. This is usually the percentage rule given that we found to be roughly correct. Is that 30% is 30% of the total audience you'll reach is audience that will come somehow through organic channels within Kickstarter. They'll be using
Right.
Kickstarter for other reasons and they'll
Right.
come across your thing. That's about 30%. The rest, you have to bring yourself. And obviously, if you bring 1,000, 30% of that is 300, etc. If you bring no one, that might very well mean zero will come from Kickstarter itself. And agencies usually what they provide is not so much as like will bring people for you, but will sell you a model that you can follow that will resolve the plethora of questions that you might have about potential ways to reach that audience. There are many ways to get people to look at something on Kickstarter, but the way we've done it is we've done it through Facebook ads, which we were led to believe in. I think it's correct. Is sort of like industry standard way for bringing people to Kickstarter.
Couple notes about that really quick. So first of all, you brought up a good point. Agencies provide you that model. This might not be universally true, but in most cases, when you opt to go with an agency, there's still a lot of work for you personally to do. Don't go into it thinking, I can offload this onto someone and they're going to go create a successful Kickstarter for me. It doesn't work that way. There might be some services out there that do that. I don't know. But most of them are going to require that you do a fair amount of work on your end. The other thing to note as well about Kickstarters is, I should say, in defense of Launch Boom, we had a successful Kickstarter. You have to temper your own expectations because of their model with the first backers and people coming on day one. We made 41,000 on day one. So I was anticipating at that point that we were going to blow past 6 figures. Not true. We ended up at 57K. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. Day one is going to be the biggest for you. The last day was, our second largest day, but it was obviously far more modest than the 41,000 we made on day one. So also recognize, I guess, the definition of success, because we did hit our goal and then some. Just because I wanted us to make 7 to 20 figures doesn't mean that it's going to happen. So temper your expectations, especially if it's your first project. No one's heard of us before this. So, regardless of how good our game is, we had a ceiling. That's going to be true for 99.999% of other games too.
When it comes to expectations, right? I did a little bit of a precedent study when it comes to Kickstarter, and the Kickstarters that had some negative outcomes seem to be the one that had they couldn't meet demand, or their expectations were too high. They couldn't keep promises. How do you budget yourself so that you can keep expectations, give people what they paid for, and all those things?
Yeah, I mean,
don't make an MMORPG.
Okay.
Which is a sort of like classic case of like the biggest, and it might be like useful to think of the worst Kickstarter fiascos. The most famous ones are MMORPGs, and when you think about what went wrong there's also quite a lot of bad stigma that became attached to Kickstarter forever because of those fiascos. But it's very easy to get into the mode of thinking, hey, I'm gonna come Kickstarter route, community building with this game idea I have, to getting very excited about the art of promise making. Because ultimately that is what you're doing on Kickstarter. You're making promises. And something about us humans make us quite easily grow things a bit out of proportions when we, try to make the best promise we can.
Yeah.
And I think it's very useful to temper those promises, especially before you come to Kickstarter. 'Cause, things get heated, and we've actually promised quite a few things during the Kickstarter, which we ended up we didn't go on. We didn't. We brought all the promises we made to completion in print files that are now being shared with the printers. But there were some things that we weren't ready to promise, and then we promised them during the campaign because we were in the heat of the moment, and people
Right.
were
Right.
asking for that thing, and we just wanted to make people happy. We wanted to bring them exactly what they wanted. This was the first time we were showing Havoc. Some of the things we ended up saying we unfortunately can't do, but sometimes we just wanted to say, hey, yes, we can make that thing work. So it's impossible. It's important to temper yourself before and during.
It is.
Mm.
So, and another way to temper is to manage expectations of your community. So, and the way to do that is to communicate. Make sure that you're always giving them as much insight as possible into what you're doing, without giving away trade secrets. But if they understand why you are either fulfilling or perhaps not fulfilling your promise, then they can accept it. But they need to understand why. So it's a really difficult balance between, under promise and over deliver. Like, that's the ideal, of course, but in under promising, you're also selling yourself short by definition. So it's just the honest answer is it's a really difficult tight walk, but the only solution, or at least the best solution, is as Antek says, temper, but also communicate. Be open with your backers and your community regular communication, weekly at least, to make sure that everyone understands where everything lies and why that is the status quo.
A
Definitely.
simple rule to follow is that when making a promise, one should know what steps leading from the promise to execution always, right? Don't make promises that you don't exactly know how. If you
Mhm.
don't know how something could be, exactly how something could be made, don't make a promise that you'll make it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
to
good
give
point.
a very mundane example, we were being asked by our community to make our own card sleeves, but I never made a card sleeve. Our experience usually lies in paper, which, to print on paper, to print on plastic, what's the difference, you might think? But it is actually quite different. Only after we contacted manufacturers and started making some math and realizing exactly what would have to happen for us to be able to provide these
Mhm.
card sleeves, we realized, hey, we would have to print 1 million of them. And not 1 million, we won't sell 1 million of them during the Kickstarter. So we just did the math required to understand if something is
Gotcha.
reasonable before we made a promise.
Okay, last point, last tangent that brings up is listen to your community and at least tell them that you'll try, right? So we said, we don't know if we can do that, but we're going to look into it, and we did. So if they
Right.
request something, and again, that goes back to the communication. If you tell them in the end, yeah, we did look into it, we tried, this is the reason why we can't do it. Thank you for, the idea. Sorry that we can't come through on this. Hopefully someday we can. So,
Mhm.
you know,
Exactly. It's that dopamine hit, right? When someone asks you for something, you're like, "Yeah, I will do it." It's
Yeah.
that dopamine hit. Like, it makes you feel good. Um, uh, Zach, you were talking about the guy who was saying, "Oh, this is a scam," and then you played with him, and now he's a huge backer. When it comes to the gaming industry, I've noticed something very interesting when I go to forums or gaming websites. Cynicism is a core trait on in us gamers for some reason. So when they announce a new game, a new project, it's usually met with skepticism and cynicism. Very rarely are people like, yes, this is what I want. Do you think that comes from companies over promising and under delivering? Like, is that something we experience a lot when it comes to games?
We're cynical by nature, and our world is very cynical. It's not a gaming problem specifically, but of course it is rampant in gaming. So is the root cause of it those companies that have fallen short in promises? I can't say definitively yes. It doesn't help. When people get used to sort of that dynamic of big companies making promises that they can't keep, then it's sort of natural that eventually they're going to fall into this assumption, cynicism that this thing is not going to work out or come to fruition. So the only way to combat that is to, well, if we're talking about the context of a game, play the game with people as early as possible. Let them see it. The way to defeat cynicism is to have them experience it firsthand. Experience the thing firsthand. They might not like it. If that's maybe they play the game and they go, yeah, my confirmation bias kicks in, and they say, yes, this is bad, just like I thought it would be. Fine, okay, you were probably never going to be won over in the first place. But truly, the only way to defeat it is to give them that firsthand personal experience.
I think it's a norm to say that it's the game companies that are the bad guys, and something's rotten among the big companies, and the people are feeling it, But I think this aura of commodification is not only influencing how games are made, it's also influencing, and even more deeply, how games are enjoyed, experienced, and spoken about. Because we now are dealing with a market where the big titles that everyone is talking about are built by huge teams whose names you don't know. They are made by teams of hundreds, sometimes thousands. And when people are commenting on details that they don't like, entire directions that they don't like, they often don't comment in the same way they would, speak to a game designer, like flesh and blood, because these big companies are just like kind of like inhuman monster, and you forget that
Exactly. They're
like
not
there are
like a
real
specific
people
person,
working
right?
there.
Yeah.
They're making gigantic things, and there are real people working there. And I think our relationship to games as things made by real human beings is also something that sometimes we have to maybe remind ourselves of, that there are like human beings there, not just people in suits.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, some onus falls on, some responsibility falls on the gaming community. I mean, for those people who are just going to be predisposed to be cynical and or dickish, and they're just not going to accept anything, I
Yes.
mean, that's on you in a lot of cases. And, you can't win over everyone. There's a lot of people like that in this world, unfortunately. So don't waste all of your time and energy trying to win over all of those people. If you want to bite the bullet and give it a shot every now and then just to see what happens, which we did, and it was fun, and it worked out for us in that case. But you're not going to win over everyone, and not everyone is going to spew rainbows and sunshine your way. So ignore those if you can.
Yeah, 100%. In the future, when your company becomes more successful and big, how do you guys plan to keep this organic feeling to it, this humane touch?
Personal connection, as much as you can. So I think this applies to more than just gaming. In my experience on LinkedIn specifically, of all places, there are a lot of CEOs who make themselves available for contact. There are a lot of CEOs who don't. Probably more the latter than the former. Don't ever think you are too important for anyone to give them your time. There are, of course, realistic, limitations and constraints on one's time. So
Right.
I'm not saying that every single person who reaches out to you, you have to, have a meeting with them. But say yes more often than you say no. I mean, fill your calendar. I mean, be open to people. Try to genuinely connect with people. Try to genuinely lift people up if you can. I mean, there's been a lot of successful CEO types that I've come to and talked to for guidance and advice, and they've graciously given it to me. There's been a lot who said, "Sorry, I don't have time for you." So recognize that you're not. And sometimes you get the sense that that's very true. They just straight up don't have that time for you, and that's okay. You can't take it personally. Sometimes you get the sense that this person thinks they're hot shit and they're too cool for me, and So try to be one of those people who falls into that first group. Do your best to give people the time of day. If someone helps lift you up in the early stages of your career, pay it forward and do the same for someone else on the back end.
I'll go back to the analogy of the circle, changing it a little bit. Just I think want to foster more than a circle, kind of like a temple, maybe, where there is a sense of shared culture that doesn't only on its own grow out of Nyx Studios, but also is something that we direct and that we steer towards the direction that we think is going to be valuable to us as a company that wants to have a community with which we want to share the stuff we make, from which we want to get that kick and dopamine hit, but also a community that will enjoy our things and will have some kind of a benefit coming from the fact that they're part of this community. I'm not sure if I already said it, but one other thing that makes communities special is that everyone inside a community has to have some kind of a benefit for staying in it. Otherwise, it won't stay alive for too long. I think you can attract people to your Discord for a couple of weeks with some kind of a flashy statement or an ad or a trailer or something. But if you want to build a more like deep community, something, like a group of people who will stay there for years, maybe, then they have to have a benefit coming from their presence, their participation. There's a whole bunch of like practical ways you can do to bring benefit to your community members, but it sort of comes down to just creating for them a space where they can self-express themselves and do it in a way that's unique, right? Like for us, I would like to believe the world we've created and the little bits of it, little symbols and stories we put into our Discord community make for like an interesting temple to be in and to share each other's values inside.
But also on that note, I mean, recognize and reward those individuals. I'm not saying you have to send everyone $1,000 if they're supporting your Discord or whatever, but recognize them, thank them, as simple as that sounds. That goes a long way, and do it genuinely. Don't do it because you're trying to check off a box, but take a moment at least to recognize them and show them gratitude and appreciation for helping build your community, because that's what they're doing. They're engaged in it, they're being part of it, but they're also helping you build it by default. So, honor that.
Also, we might not know about like the things that one has to do when a community falls apart, because we're in this really lucky situation that our community is quite awesome. We really like them.
That's awesome.
And and this means that especially like the most active people in our community are also like really great personalities to be around. And that makes the whole, that's what makes Discord different from other social media that one could potentially choose for community building, is that there's more, it's more reciprocal on Discord.
There's more back and forth between them.
Yeah, and people create personalities for themselves, the kind of personalities that would be kind of weird to show in a thread of comments under an Instagram post, right? So,
sure. Right.
It's important to recognize people for who they are inside a community, which,
And again, I'm going to reiterate, give them your time. I mean, the vast majority, perhaps all of those daily active individuals in our Discord, I have personally played the game with at least once, if not multiple times. You've got a shared love of this thing, in this case, the game and the world. Share it, be a part of it, engage with them, and they'll appreciate that. They'll support you.
Zach plays games with the community. I dance for them on camera.
That sounds terrible. We should probably give some context.
Yeah, I'm like, context. Whoa, what?
Well, so I think no one will realize this unless they watch this very episode. If they do, that the character that hosts the bar on Thursdays in Mild Spirits is voice acted by a very good friend of mine, a voice actor, Matt. But since recently we're mocapping the character using me. So what we're doing is just that I record videos of me moving, and then this is how the character moves in the bar.
He sent me the raw footage of that over the weekend, and I'll treasure it with my life. But also, I'm happily going to sell that for first bidder, highest bidder, $1 million going once. I will send you a picture of or a video of Antek dancing. It's the best.
I would love to see that. I would pay a lot of money to see that, 100%. But yeah, guys, just finishing up the episode, a couple of things. Where can people find you? They watch this episode, they think, oh, I want to talk to Zach or Antek, be part of the community. Where can people find you? What's the best way?
Well, come to the Discord first and foremost. Discord.gg/Havoc-Gen0, dashes between those words, Havoc-Gen-0. Enter Havoc.com is an easy one. That you're not going to interact with us directly on there. There's not a means for that, but to interact directly, do it on Discord. But feel free to send me a DM on whatever social media you prefer. I'm pretty active on other social media as well, so I'm happy to chat anywhere.
Perfect. Antek, where can people find you?
All same.
Same thing?
Just
Gotcha.
Exactly the same things. Discord and email is what I usually respond to.
Yeah, Antek doesn't use the other social medias quite as much, so if you want to get him directly, Discord's probably the fastest way to do it. Or Discord, email, as he says. But yeah, you can't go wrong with Discord. You'll definitely find us there.
Definitely. We'll have the link, guys. We'll have the link for the Discord in the comments down below. And one more thing, where can people play Havoc? Where can they order it and get it, like physically?
So they can have the late pledges closed yet? What day is this going live?
It's going live on the 18th, so tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay.
So the late pledges have officially closed. However, we are a tight-knitted community, and it means that, without getting into specificities, we have a few extra boxes of Havoc, potentially. And we could be running a list of people who were not there on the backers list. But if we have any spare boxes at the end of the campaign, we'll reach back to these people who contacted us. It all comes to this, like, we can't make promises at the moment because we have just wrapped up our late pledge.
Right.
If you want to be among the first who get Havoc, reach out to us and we'll put you on some kind of a list to contact you in case that becomes possible.
But also, just come to the Discord. You can play for free. We play on Tabletopia, which is a tabletop simulator. That's one other thing we haven't even talked about. A good way to, build community is to make your game available in whatever form you can. So anyone in the world can play Havoc, and we can happily play with you. Come to Discord. We'll play on Tabletopia, and then decide for yourself if you like it enough to buy it. Spoiler, you will, because it's phenomenal. But come play for free first.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll join the Discord. Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming to the episode. That was a very awesome episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for inviting us.